The smell of petrichor and decomposing leaves was the promised scent of my abdication. After 2 decades of forging a software empire, Terralogix, from the primordial chaos of a server rack in my garage, I had executed my final command. I sold it. The press release called it a merger. I called it an escape. I had traded the tyranny of the quarterly earnings call and the sterile, recycled air of Silicon Valley for a house in a fledgling community named Serenity Point. Its primary selling point, the core of its marketing brochure, was its position on the shores of the pristine, privately owned Whisperwood Lake. It was the perfect place to become anonymous. My house was the last on a quiet cul-de-sac, a modern craftsman design with a sprawling back lawn that rolled gently down to the water's edge. The closing had been unusually complex, an asset transfer, my lawyer had called it, that left the young real estate agent utterly bewildered. I remembered my attorney, a man whose hourly rate was comical, clapping me on the back and saying, "It's done. Alex, they get the buildable lots with strict covenants. Your holding company retains the core asset and all riparian rights in perpetuity. It's the cleanest way to divest while protecting your leverage." At the time, it felt like just another deal. Now, it was supposed to be the foundation of my peace. My goal was a strategic retreat from purpose, to read novels bound in paper instead of market analysis on a tablet, to learn the nuances of a charcoal grill, and, above all, to fish. My grandfather, a man of few words and infinite patience, had taught me the art of the cast on a murky Ohio reservoir. The rhythmic whip of the rod and the gentle tug of the current had always been my own personal form of code, debugging a way to untangle the knots in my mind. Whisperwood Lake was to be my sanctuary. The first week was a study in blissful inactivity. I unpacked with no deadline, sat on my deck listening to the unfamiliar dialect of eastern bluebirds, and felt the tectonic plates of stress that had fused to my spine begin, ever so slightly, to drift apart. On the 8th day, I met Carol Medford, and the ground began to shake once more. I was in my front yard, attempting to decipher the hieroglyphics of a gas-powered lawn edger, when she glided to a halt on the sidewalk. She was leading a small, immaculately white poodle that appeared less a dog and more a sentient cloud of spun sugar. Carol herself was ageless in the way of the meticulously maintained, dressed in blindingly white tennis apparel. Her posture was perfect, her blonde hair an architectural marvel, and her gaze had the penetrating focus of a targeting laser. "Lot 124, I presume," she stated. It was an assertion, not an inquiry. Her voice was melodious, but carried the resonant frequency of command. "That's me. Alex Henderson," I said, wiping a greasy hand on my jeans before offering it. She appraised it for a split second, a micro-expression of distaste, before enclosing it in a brief, bloodless handshake. "Carol Medford, Lot 102. She paused, letting the silence confer the appropriate weight to her next words. "I am the president of the Homeowners Association." She delivered the title as if it were a hereditary peerage. "Welcome to Serenity Point. We pride ourselves on maintaining the highest community standards. It is, after all, what protects our property values." "It's a lovely place," I said, my standard pleasantry. "Happy to be here." Indeed. Her eyes began a systematic sweep of my property, cataloging every detail. They stopped on the small, discreet sign from the moving company, nearly hidden by a rosebush. According to Article 9, Section 4 of the bylaws, all commercial signage must be removed within 72 hours of taking possession. You are currently at 192 hours. I blinked. Oh, I completely forgot about that. Sorry. An oversight. "I'm certain," she said, her smile as thin and sharp as a razor wire. "Furthermore, your refuse containers are visible from the street through the gap in your side gate." Article 6. Section 11B is quite clear. All containers must be entirely concealed from public view. I trust you received the welcome binder with the complete set of covenants and restrictions at closing. I did. It's comprehensive. Precision is the cornerstone of harmony. Mr. Henderson, I will overlook these initial infractions as a gesture of welcome. Please ensure they are rectified by the end of the day. Without another word, she executed a flawless pivot and continued her patrol, the poodle trotting in perfect sync. I was left standing in a cloud of her perfume and my own bewilderment. This was a level of procedural pedantry I hadn't encountered since dealing with EU data privacy regulators. Still, I was determined to be a good soldier in this new life. Peace required a few strategic surrenders. I pulled the sign and rearranged my garage to hide the bins. The next morning, the lake was calling. I assembled my finest fly rod, a beautiful piece of craftsmanship that had sat unused in a closet for a decade. I tied on a hand-tied woolly bugger and walked down my lawn to the small dock. The mist was rising off the water. The air was thick with the scent of pine, and the world felt blessedly silent. This was the interest payment on the fortune I had made. My first cast was a thing of beauty, the line unfurling in a perfect, poetic loop. The fly landed on the water with the delicacy of a falling leaf. I felt a visceral sense of release, a letting go of everything I had been. Cease this activity immediately. The voice, sharp and imperious, sliced through the morning mist. Carol Medford stood at the top of my lawn, a clipboard now her scepter of office. She was a wraith of suburban order, summoned by my transgression. "I'm just fishing," I said, my voice calm, belying the sudden spike in my heart rate. "No, you are not," she declared, marching down the damp grass. Whisperwood Lake is a protected aesthetic feature of this community. It is not a common fishing hole. Bylaw, YMAL, Section 2A. No recreational water activities, including, but not limited to swimming, boating, or angling, are permitted. I reeled in my line, a deep sense of exhaustion washing over me. "Carol, I understand the rules, but this is my property. My deed clearly states my lot extends to the water." "Your deed states your lot extends to the high water mark. Mr. Henderson," she corrected, her voice dripping with condescending precision. "A legally distinct boundary, the littoral zone, the water itself, and this dock you are standing on, are all HOA common property under management of the board." She tapped her clipboard. "Consider this your only verbal warning. Any further violation will trigger the fine schedule." As she walked away, a triumphant rigidity in her spine, I stared out at the water. It was a beautiful, empty, forbidden paradise. Internally, I recalled the specific clause in the master agreement. Section 4 grantor retains exclusive ownership of parcel 7B 4A1, defined as the body of Whisperwood Lake and its underlying bed, inclusive of a 50-foot terrestrial easement from the surveyed high water mark. Carol was wrong, dangerously, confidently wrong, but correcting her now would mean revealing my hand, and the man who built Terralogics never revealed his hand until the game was already won. For now, I would let her believe she was queen of this little pond. The first formal notice arrived in a cream-colored envelope, its paper stock ostentatiously thick. The Serenity Point logo, an elegant tree curving over a tranquil lake, was embossed in gold foil at the top. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive stationery. The letter cited my unauthorized angling attempt and issued a formal warning. It also, in a separate paragraph, noted that a recent community standards inspection had found my lawn to be at an average height of 3.3 inches, a clear violation of the 3-inch maximum stipulated in Bylaw 5. A $50 fine was attached. I held the letter, a muscle in my jaw twitching. This wasn't about rules. It was a power play, pure and simple. My old instincts screamed at me to engage, to deploy legal resources, to crush this petty bureaucrat. But the new Alex, the retiree seeking tranquility, counseled a different path: compliance, de-escalation. I paid the fine. I put the approved lawn service on a bi-weekly schedule. The letters became a regular feature. A $25 fine for my garage door being left open for more than 60 minutes while I was working inside. A $75 fine for a non-compliant welcome mat, its cheerful welcome deemed an unapproved textual element. A $100 fine for having a satellite dish that, while on the approved list, was allegedly installed 2 degrees outside the designated architectural sightline corridor. Each fine was paid without comment. I was gathering data, letting her build her case against herself. During this period, the calls from my old life hadn't quite ceased. One afternoon, I was in my home office, a space dominated by a massive curved monitor displaying a multi-layered topographical map of Serenity Point. It wasn't Google Earth. It was the Terralogix Helios platform, my life's work, rendering the terrain with a precision that could measure the erosion of a single hillside. My old partner, David Chen, called. "Alex, quick question," he said, his voice tinny from a speakerphone in some distant boardroom. "The lawyers for that Sterling Ranch development are asking about the covenant we attached to the land parcel we got for that survey deal in 19. Did we cede the subsurface mineral rights, or just the surface grazing leases?" "Check the addendum, Dave," I said, my eyes tracing a shimmering blue line on the map that delineated the HOA's jurisdiction. It stopped a considerable distance from the water's edge. The standard agreement retains all subsurface rights, unless explicitly negotiated for additional software licenses. Sterling Ranch was a basic package. Right. Figured as much. Just wanted to be sure. How's retirement? Not boring you to death? It has its moments of intense procedural focus, I said dryly, watching a digital icon representing Carol's daily walk move along the path on my screen. It was just inside the blue line, just inside my property. "Good for you. Just don't forget how the real world works," David said, and hung up. The call was a stark reminder. For 2 decades, Terralogix had often bartered its unparalleled geological and topographical analysis software, not for cash, but for the most stable of all assets: land. We had a portfolio of parcels, rights, and easements scattered across the country, each one a monument to a complex negotiation. Carol thought she was enforcing bylaws. She had no idea she was poking at the edges of a vast, invisible empire. I zoomed in on the map, my fingers tracing the boundaries of Parcel 7B 4A1 Whisperwood Lake. My asset, my leverage, my patience was a strategic resource, and I would expend it carefully. My campaign of strategic compliance began to fray when I decided to add pathway lighting to my backyard. They were beautiful, minimalist bronze fixtures that cast a warm, downward glow, designed to be unobtrusive and elegant. I spent an entire Saturday installing them, the simple, honest labor a welcome balm. That evening, the path to the lake was transformed into a subtle, inviting trail of light. It was, I felt, a profound improvement. Carol felt otherwise. She was waiting for me the next day as I went to get the mail. Her arms crossed, her expression one of deep personal offense. A flagrant violation of the architectural and landscape standards. "Mr. Henderson," she announced without preamble, "all exterior modifications, especially lighting, require prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee." "I'm the chair of the committee," she added, before I could ask. "And I can assure you, these garish fixtures would never have been approved." "They're not garish, Carol. They're tasteful, and they're a safety feature." "They are a violation," she countered, her voice hardening. "You will remove them immediately, or you will be fined $500, with an additional $50 penalty for each day they remain." This time, I didn't acquiesce. "I'm not removing them." A flicker of dark delight sparked in her eyes. This was the moment she had been waiting for. My defiance was the fuel her righteous indignation required. "Then you leave me no choice." The fine notices began arriving daily. I filed them neatly in a folder labeled HOA Correspondence. 2 nights after our confrontation, I woke to the sound of my security system's perimeter alert pinging my phone. I pulled up the live feed from the camera concealed in a birdhouse near the lake path. The night vision was crystal clear. It showed a figure, dressed in dark clothing, moving swiftly along the path. The figure paused, bent down, and there was a sharp, cracking sound. Then again, and a third time. The figure then retreated, melting back into the darkness. The next morning, I found 3 of my new lights shattered, their bronze stems bent into grotesque angles. The ground was soft, and next to one of the broken lights was a clear, sharp footprint from a high-end, cross-trainer-style shoe. The same tread pattern I'd seen on Carol's shoes every single day. The vandalism was deniable, but the video file, saved to an encrypted server in my basement, was not. That day, I upgraded my security. I didn't just want to record. I wanted to analyze. I spent the afternoon at my terminal, writing a script that integrated the camera feeds with the Helios platform. I meticulously traced the exact, legal boundary of my property, the one that included the 50-foot easement around the lake, and created a geofence. Any human-sized object crossing that line would now trigger a priority alert. Log the subject's movement path, and cross-reference it with a database of known residents I had compiled from the public-facing neighborhood directory. Mark, my former head of corporate security, would have called it grossly excessive. I called it data-driven conflict resolution. Carol thought she was operating in the shadows. She didn't realize I had already mapped the entire theater of war down to the last millimeter. Carol's next front in her war of attrition was social. Having failed to break me with fines and vandalism, she sought to isolate me, to turn me into a persona non grata within the very community I'd hoped to join. Her chosen weapon was the private Serenity Point Residents Facebook group. Her opening salvo was a masterpiece of insinuation. She posted a photo of a perfectly manicured rose garden belonging to one of her allies, captioning it, "It's such a joy to live in a community where residents take pride in our shared aesthetic and respect the guidelines that protect our investments. A big thank you to everyone who follows the rules and helps keep Serenity Point beautiful. It's so important that we all work together." The post was a declaration of allegiance. The comments underneath were from her choir. So true. Carol, we can't let one person's arrogance ruin things for everyone. Thank you for all your hard work. Carol, it must be so difficult dealing with people who think they are above it all. A few days later, she escalated. Important announcement. Please remember that the lake and surrounding shoreline are sensitive ecological areas and HOA common property. For this reason, access is strictly prohibited. We have had ongoing issues with a resident repeatedly trespassing in this area. Please, for your own safety, and to avoid unpleasantness, respect the posted boundaries. This was a direct, targeted lie. I was the only resident on the lake, and I had not been back on the dock since her first warning. She was creating a narrative of a hostile, defiant outsider. I felt compelled to defend myself. I wrote a calm, factual comment. To clarify, I am the resident in question, and I have not accessed the dock or lake since being informed of the HOA's position. I believe there is a significant misunderstanding of the legal property boundaries, which I have offered to discuss with the board. I am not hostile, merely seeking clarity. I hit post. I watched the small gray circle spin, and then it was gone. A notification appeared. This comment has been removed by a group administrator. She was not just the president. She was the censor, the arbiter of acceptable speech. She was ensuring only her version of the truth could exist. The real-world effects were subtle, but swift. The friendly waves from across the street stopped. Conversations at the community mailbox would fall silent when I approached. I was being ghosted by an entire neighborhood. One evening, I tried to strike up a conversation with a neighbor, Tom, who was washing his car. He looked at me, then glanced nervously over his shoulder toward Carol's house 2 streets away, and suddenly remembered an urgent appointment he had to get to. She had made association with me a risk. The sense of isolation was more corrosive than any fine. It felt like a personal failure. I had exited a world of high-stakes corporate warfare, only to find myself outmaneuvered in a battle for simple neighborliness. The isolation was punctured by a call from a world I had left behind. Chloe Zhang, a prominent journalist for a major technology magazine, had somehow tracked down my private number. "Alex, it's like finding a ghost," she said, her voice sharp and intelligent. "I'm doing a 10-year retrospective on the pioneers of geospatial intelligence. TerraLogix is Chapter 1. Everyone wants to know what happened to the man behind it all." "The man behind it all retired," I said, looking out the window at the quiet, empty street. "He's trying to learn how to relax." "Come on, Alex. You were never the relaxing type. There were always those rumors swirling around TerraLogix that the real value wasn't the software, but the massive, off-the-books land portfolio you acquired through your contracts. That you were playing a much longer game than anyone realized. Any comment on that?" Her question struck a nerve. The portfolio was real. The long game was real. And I was currently living on one of its smallest, most contested squares. Rumors are just that. "Chloe," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "I'm just a private citizen enjoying his privacy now." "Is that what you call it?" she asked, a knowing edge to her voice. "Well, if you change your mind, the world would love to hear your story." After I hung up, her words echoed in my mind. Playing a much longer game. I had tried to stop playing, but Carol had forced my hand. She was slandering me in a pathetic little Facebook group, ignorant of the fact that she was threatening a man whose legacy and assets were the subject of national speculation. She thought she was isolating a man. She had no idea she was cornering an animal far more dangerous than she could comprehend. Carol's social and administrative attacks had failed to produce my capitulation or expulsion. So, she escalated to her final, most potent weapon, summoning the institutional power of the state and federal government to validate her authority. The first salvo was an animal control truck rumbling down my quiet street. The officer looked profoundly bored as I answered the door. "Sir, we received an anonymous complaint about a dog. Says it's being kept in cruel conditions, whining all day." "I don't own a dog," I said, stepping aside and gesturing into my house. "Feel free to search the premises." He peered inside, sighed, and ticked a box on his tablet. Figured as much. It's the third anonymous animal complaint on this street this month. All unfounded. He knew. He just couldn't say it. Next came the city code enforcement inspector, a harried-looking man clutching a clipboard. "Complaint about an unpermitted backyard structure," he mumbled, already looking defeated. He was pointing at my gazebo. I didn't say a word. I simply went to my office and returned with the folder containing the notarized permits, the architectural plans approved and stamped by his own department, and the final inspection certificate. He flipped through them, his expression turning to one of weary resignation. "Well, this is about as permitted as a structure can get." The complaint mentioned illegal wiring and a cracked foundation. "The complaint was filed by someone with a vivid imagination," I said. He nodded, apologized for the intrusion, and left. Each visit was a calibrated disruption, a small tear in the fabric of my peace, designed to wear me down, to make my life so filled with bureaucratic friction that I would simply give up and leave. But her final move was a masterpiece of malicious escalation. She called the Environmental Protection Agency. An EPA field agent, a serious woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, appeared at my door one afternoon. She presented her credentials. "Sir, we've received a credible and highly detailed report that you are disposing of hazardous materials by dumping them into Whisperwood Lake." The accusation was so vile, so antithetical to my entire life's work in environmental data science, that for a moment I was speechless. "The report alleges," she continued, consulting her notes, "that on multiple occasions you have been observed late at night pouring 55-gallon drums of what was described as industrial solvent off your dock." The sheer, operatic villainy of the accusation was Carol's signature. "That is a monstrous lie," I said, my voice low and trembling with rage. "I am a retired environmental software engineer. I have dedicated my life to protecting ecosystems, not poisoning them." "I'm just here to follow procedure, sir," she said, unmoved. "I need to take water and soil samples from your property line and from the lake itself. For the next 2 hours, I was forced to watch as my backyard was treated like a potential Superfund site." As she collected her samples, my professional pride overrode my anger. "If you want a true picture of the lake's health," I told her, "you should pull a core sample from the benthic zone, about 30 meters off the dock. You'll be able to see the sediment layers. I can tell you from pre-development baseline data that you'll find no significant increase in heavy metal concentrations post-2020. The primary pollutant here is phosphorus runoff from lawn fertilizers. But my property has a bioswale to mitigate that. You should check the lawns upstream." She stopped and stared at me. "Pre-development baseline data. How would you have access to that?" "My old company did the initial environmental impact study for the developers as part of our land acquisition deal," I said, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. "I've got a full multispectral analysis of this entire watershed going back 15 years. The lake is healthier now than it was then." Her eyebrows shot up. This was clearly not the kind of information she usually received from an alleged polluter. She finished her work in silence, her professional curiosity visibly warring with her official duties. "We'll have the results in a week or two," she said as she left. I stood on my dock, the setting sun casting long shadows across the water. Carol had made a fatal error. She had chosen a battlefield where I was not just the king. I was the god. She was using the EPA to question the environmental integrity of a lake whose every molecule I had digitally modeled, whose every ecological variable I had tracked for years. She thought she was calling in the cavalry. She had no idea she was just handing me the ammunition for my final, overwhelming assault. The EPA results came back, as I knew they would, showing the water quality to be exemplary. The case was closed. This public failure, this invalidation of her authority by a federal agency, was more than Carol's ego could withstand. The time for indirect warfare was over. She needed a direct, personal victory. I could feel it coming. It came on a Thursday afternoon at the community mailbox. She was waiting for me, her posture radiating a condensed, white-hot fury. "You think you are so untouchable," she began, her voice a low hiss. The usual veneer of polite society was gone, stripped away to reveal the raw malice beneath. "With your fancy lawyers and your government connections? But you're just a bully." The only bully here, Carol, is the one who files false reports with federal agencies. I replied, my voice calm and cold. "I am protecting this community," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Something you wouldn't understand. I know all about you, Mr. Henderson. I know about Terralogics. I know the kind of ruthless man you are. It would be a tragedy if the current board of directors, or perhaps some of your major investors, were to receive a detailed portfolio of your antisocial activities here. Harassing neighbors, vandalizing property, illegally dumping toxic waste. Even if the charges don't stick, the accusations alone could do irreparable damage to your precious legacy." It was the ultimate threat, not just to my peace, but to my past, to my life's work. She was threatening to use lies to unravel the truth of who I was. Just that morning, I'd had a call from the new CEO of Terralogics, a bright young woman I had mentored. She'd been asking for advice on structuring a new deal in Montana. "They're land-rich, but cash-poor," she'd said. "I was thinking of proposing the standard Model 7B contract, the one you designed for asset retention partnerships." The contrast was staggering. In one part of my life, I was a respected mentor, my legacy secure. In this part, I was being threatened with its destruction by a woman whose entire world was circumscribed by the borders of this subdivision. In that moment, the retiree I was pretending to be died. The CEO I used to be took control. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply met her gaze. And for the first time, I didn't bother to conceal the immense, cold pressure of the power I had wielded for 20 years. "Are you threatening to extort me?" Carol, I asked, my voice flat, devoid of heat, yet carrying the chill of a tomb. She flinched, the word extort hitting her like a slap. "You have just made a catastrophic miscalculation," I continued, my voice never rising above a conversational tone. "You have spent months escalating a conflict based on a complete lack of information. You believe this is your territory. You believe your bylaws are the ultimate authority. You are mistaken on all counts. This conversation is over, but I assure you, our next one will be our last." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing by the mailboxes, a sudden, terrible uncertainty dawning on her face. The game was set. The pieces were in place. All that was left was for the Queen to make her final, fatal move onto the square I had prepared for her. For 1 week, I did nothing. The silence was my final gambit. I let her accusations hang in the air. I let her threats curdle in the quiet. I watched through my security cameras as her daily walks became more frequent, her path more erratic, circling my property like a shark sensing blood. She was building to a crescendo, and I was going to provide the stage. On a brilliant, cloudless Saturday morning, I walked down to my dock. I didn't bring a fishing rod this time. I brought a collapsible surveyor's tripod and a small, high-precision laser theodolite from my office. I began setting it up, leveling the instrument, pretending to take measurements of the far shore. It was an act of blatant, technical defiance, an incomprehensible violation in her eyes. It was the Matador's cape. It took 7 minutes. She came not as a solitary enforcer, but as the head of a procession. Her 2 loyal board members, Sharon and Gary, flanked her like subpar Secret Service agents. Her phone was already out, recording. She stopped at the edge of my lawn, a space she still believed was the border of her kingdom. Alexander Henderson. Her voice was a theatrical boom, designed to carry across the neighborhood. Windows slid open. Neighbors drifted onto their porches. The audience was assembling. This is the culmination of your campaign of harassment and defiance. You are on HOA common property with unapproved industrial equipment. You have ignored hundreds of warnings. You have accrued thousands of dollars in fines. I slowly turned from the theodolite, giving her a look of mild academic curiosity. It's a beautiful day for a survey. Carol. The mundanity of my response pushed her over the edge. Your games are over. I am hereby issuing a final, punitive fine of $3,000 for willful and persistent trespassing. A lien is being filed against your home, and, as of this moment, I am reporting you to the police for criminal trespass. She held her phone aloft like a scepter and dramatically dialed 911, putting it on speakerphone for all to hear. Yes, I am Carol Medford, president of the Serenity Point HOA. I need officers dispatched immediately to Whisperwood Lake. A resident, Alexander Henderson of Lot 124, is trespassing on community property and refuses to leave. He is belligerent. Please hurry. She ended the call with a flourish, her face a mask of righteous victory. This was her moment, the public vanquishing of her enemy. 2 police cruisers arrived in under 5 minutes, their presence casting a pall of official gravity over the scene. The senior officer, Sergeant Miller, a man whose face was etched with the weary patience of a long career, stepped out. He looked from Carol's triumphant face to me on the dock and sighed a deep, internal sigh. Carol, what is it this time? Sergeant, this man is the problem, she declared, pointing at me. He is flagrantly trespassing on HOA property. I want him arrested. I have it all on video. Sergeant Miller trudged down the lawn. Sir, you know the drill. I have to ask you to leave the common area. I gave him a polite nod. Of course, officer. But first, a point of clarification. It is actually all of you who are on my property. A collective gasp went through the assembled neighbors. Carol laughed. A short, ugly bark. He's lost his mind. Sergeant. I ignored her, pulled out my own phone, and made a call. David, it's Alex. Go ahead and execute the package. Send the full deed portfolio and the Terralogics confirmatory survey for Parcel 7B4A1 to Sergeant Miller's departmental email and to Evans Law Group. Yes, the full asset file. Now. I hung up and addressed the officer. Sergeant, your dispatch will receive an email in the next minute. It will contain the master deed for a 300-acre parcel of land recorded in 2015. It will also contain my company's LiDAR and ground-penetrating radar surveys of that land, which are accurate to within 2 centimeters, unlike the county assessor's maps, which are off by nearly 3 meters on the northern boundary. I then turned my full attention to Carol. My voice dropped, losing its neighborly warmth and taking on the incisive chill of a CEO dismantling a failing division. You've been quoting bylaws at me for months, Carol, but you never bothered to read the foundational document, the land sale agreement between my holding company, Henderson Land and Asset, and the Serenity Point Development Corporation. You see, I didn't just buy a house here. My company acquired this entire valley a decade ago as payment for a massive geological survey contract. We then sold the residential lots, the land your houses are on, to the developer. Sergeant Miller's radio crackled. Sarge, dispatch here. We just got an email. It's huge. Looks like official deeds. Corporate filings. Stand by. Carol's face had frozen, the victorious smirk dissolving into a slack-jawed mask of confusion. I retained private, personal ownership of the most valuable asset. I continued, my voice relentless. Parcel 7B, 4A1. The legal designation for Whisperwood Lake, its underlying bed. And this is the important part. Carol, a 50-foot terrestrial easement inland from the surveyed high water mark around the entire circumference. The HOA's jurisdiction, your entire kingdom, ends right there. I pointed to a small, almost invisible surveyor's stake in the ground, 50 feet behind where she stood. This dock, this lawn, the path you walk on every day to surveil my property. It's all mine, not common property. My property. The blood drained from Carol's face. She looked at the stake, then at me, her mind frantically trying to process the complete obliteration of her reality. So, let me be perfectly clear, I said, my voice like ice. For the past 6 months, every notice you sent me for being on my own dock was harassment. Every fine was fraudulent. And every time you have stepped past that stake, you have been trespassing. Right now, you are leading a small insurrection on my front lawn, and you have summoned law enforcement under completely false pretenses, which, as I'm sure the sergeant can confirm, is a criminal offense. Sergeant Miller, who had been reading the summary from dispatch on his phone, now looked up. His expression was no longer weary. It was stone cold. Dispatch confirms. Ma'am, this entire lakefront is registered as a private corporate asset belonging to Mr. Henderson. He looked at Carol, then at her 2 bewildered cronies. The complaint is fraudulent. You are trespassing. I am asking you one time, officially, to vacate this property immediately. Carol stood for a moment, utterly broken, a queen deposed in her own court. Then, under the stunned and contemptuous gaze of all her neighbors, she turned and walked away. Her entire world crumbled to dust around her. The aftermath was a cascade of consequences, as swift and merciless as Carol's own tactics had been. She was charged by the district attorney's office for filing a false police report. My attorney served the HOA with a lawsuit so comprehensive and meticulously documented, complete with video evidence of the vandalism and logs of every slanderous Facebook comment, that the board had no choice but to capitulate immediately. At the emergency HOA meeting, held in a tense, silent school gymnasium, my lawyer laid out the undisputed facts. The board agreed to pay for all damages, rescind every fine, issue a formal, public apology for Carol's actions, and cover all my legal fees. Carol and her 2 board allies were removed from their positions by a unanimous vote. Her public humiliation was absolute. Within 2 months, a for sale sign was planted on her perfectly manicured lawn. With the old regime dismantled, a new, reasonable board was elected. Their first order of business was to approach me, not as an adversary, but as a partner. We drafted a simple usage agreement. I formally granted all residents of Serenity Point access to the lake for recreation, asking only that they treat it with respect. The oppressive architectural rules were either abolished or revised to reflect common sense. The community, freed from its tyrant, began to breathe again. A few weeks later, as dusk settled over the valley, I was on my dock, my fly line dancing over the placid water. Tom, the neighbor who had once been too nervous to speak to me, walked down with 2 beers. "I still can't believe you owned the lake the whole time," he said, shaking his head in wonder as he handed me a bottle. "It was just an asset on a balance sheet," I said, watching the last rays of sun disappear behind the ridge. "I moved here to forget about all that. I just wanted some peace." "Well," he said, clinking his bottle against mine, "looks like you finally got it." We sat in comfortable silence, the only sound the gentle lapping of the water against the pilings of my dock. The lake was no longer a forbidden zone, but a shared treasure. I had come seeking sanctuary and found a war, but by fighting it on my own terms, with precision, data, and overwhelming strategic patience, I had finally achieved the peace I'd set out to find. I was home,